The salty air of Seabrook Bay greeted Eleanor like an old, familiar friend, a comforting hand on her shoulder after a long, winding drive. This wasn't just any coastal town, it was the backdrop to her childhood summers, a place of sun-drenched innocence and endless skies. This year, however, Seabrook was meant to be different. It was her artistic sanctuary, a temporary escape before the structured life of a city gallery assistant swallowed her whole in the autumn. She'd promised herself a summer of unbridled inspiration, a canvas of azure and emerald hues to fill her sketchbook. Her rental cottage, the Gull's Nest, clung to the cliffside, its weathered shingles a testament to countless sea-swept seasons. Inside, the scent of damp wood and dried lavender enveloped her. She unzipped her duffel bag, pulling out her well-worn leather-bound sketchbook and a box of charcoal pencils. The first stroke of summer. On her first evening stroll, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft mauves, she found her usual spot, a lone bench overlooking the churning tide. The waves whispered their ancient secrets, and the distant cry of a foghorn added a touch of melancholic beauty to the scene. She sat, sketching the dramatic silhouette of the lighthouse, when a shadow fell across her page. "Beautiful light, isn't it?" a voice murmured, deep and resonant, startling her. She looked up, her heart giving a peculiar lurch. Standing a few feet away, leaning against the sturdy wooden railing, was a man. He had a casual grace, his dark hair ruffled by the sea breeze, eyes the color of the deep ocean, crinkling at the corners as he smiled faintly. He wasn't looking at her, but out at the expansive sea, as if sharing a quiet communion with the vastness. He carried a well-loved paperback in one hand, his thumb tucked between pages. Eleanor merely nodded, her tongue suddenly clumsy. She felt a blush creep up her neck. He smelled faintly of salt and something else, old books and coffee, perhaps. He turned then, his gaze meeting hers, and a spark, fleeting but undeniable, passed between them. It was a quick, assessing glance, devoid of overt curiosity, yet it left a warmth lingering in her chest. "Just admiring the view," he added, his voice soft, almost a whisper against the symphony of the waves. He gestured vaguely at the horizon. "There's nothing quite like a Seabrook sunset." Before she could gather her wits to reply, he pushed off the railing, offering another brief, polite smile, and continued his walk down the winding path, disappearing into the twilight. Eleanor watched him go, a strange sense of loss already settling in. Who was he? The question echoed in the quiet intimacy of her inner thoughts. He was just a stranger, a momentary presence, yet he'd imprinted himself on her first summer sunset. She looked down at her sketchbook, the lighthouse now blurry, her hand having faltered. The azure canvas of her summer had just gained an unexpected, intriguing shadow. Days folded into weeks, each one a sun-drenched invitation to explore the charming nooks of Seabrook. Eleanor fell into a rhythm, early morning walks along the deserted beach, the sand cool beneath her bare feet, collecting sea glass, afternoons spent sketching in the local cafe, the aroma of roasted beans and warm pastries a constant companion, evenings on her cliffside porch, watching the stars ignite the velvet sky. Yet, amidst this tranquil routine, a silent presence began to weave itself into the fabric of her days. She saw him again. Often. Once, at the quirky local bookstore, the written tide, their hands reached for the same worn copy of a forgotten poetry collection. Their fingers brushed, a jolt passing through Eleanor, like static electricity. He pulled his hand back quickly, a murmured apology. Their eyes met again, a flicker of recognition, a shared, silent acknowledgement of the small, thrilling coincidence. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his ocean-deep eyes. "You have good taste," he'd said, and then, feeling the heat rising in her cheeks, she'd simply clutched the book and hurried to the counter. She bought it, though she hadn't meant to. It sat on her bedside table, a silent testament to the almost meeting. Another time, she was sketching the old fishing boats at the harbor, their colorful hulls peeling under the relentless sun. He was there too, sitting on a weathered crate, a notepad resting on his knees, a pen hovering over its pages. He wasn't drawing, but writing, his brow furrowed in concentration. The air around him seemed to hum with quiet intensity. Eleanor found herself surreptitiously sketching him, the curve of his nose, the way his dark hair fell over his forehead, the slight tension in his shoulders. She quickly flipped the page when he looked up, his gaze sweeping the harbor. For a heart-stopping moment, their eyes locked. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of shared understanding, before returning to his writing. His name, she learned from the barista at the cafe, a cheerful, gossipy woman named Maeve, was Leo. He was staying at the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, renting it for the summer to work on his novel, Maeve had confided, leaning conspiratorially over the counter. Quite the quiet type, but a good tipper. Leo. The name felt right, tasted good on her tongue and her thoughts. It suited the quiet intensity, the understated charm. She wondered about his novel, what stories he wove, what worlds he built. Did he write about the sea, about longing, about missed connections? Each glimpse, each almost touch, each shared space, felt like a scene from a play where the actors were acutely aware of each other, yet had no lines written for them. The longing in Eleanor grew, a delicate tendril wrapping around her heart. It wasn't an aggressive, demanding longing, but a soft ache, a quiet wonder at what might be, if only. If only she were bolder, if only he were, if only the universe would orchestrate a proper introduction. She found herself subconsciously altering her routine, hoping to run into him, then chastising herself for the childishness of it. But the hope persisted, a small, persistent flame in the vastness of her summer. The azure canvas was no longer just about the sea, it was about the shifting light and shadow of a man named Leo. The summer deepened, its days growing longer, the sun's embrace warmer. Eleanor's sketchbook swelled with Seabrook's beauty, but increasingly, her covert observations of Leo found their way onto its pages. A quick sketch of his profile as he stood by the fishing boats, the way the light caught his hair. A charcoal rendering of his hand, clutching his worn paperback. These weren't explicit portraits, but fragments, impressions, hidden amongst her landscapes. Their paths continued to intertwine with a frustrating regularity. One sweltering afternoon, Eleanor sought refuge in the cool, shaded interior of the town's small public library. She'd found a quiet corner, buried in an old art history tome, when the scent of coffee and subtle cologne drifted past her. She looked up, and there he was, Leo, browsing the fiction aisle just a few shelves away. He paused, pulling a book from the shelf, his back to her. This was it, she thought, a surge of adrenaline rushing through her veins. A library, quiet, intimate. The perfect place. She mentally rehearsed opening lines, asterisk, that's a wonderful author, have you read? Asterisk, or I recognize you from the cafe, her heart thrummed a frantic beat against her ribs. She took a deep breath, about to stand, when a sudden, shrill ringtone shattered the library's serenity. Leo winced, quickly pulling his phone from his pocket, his face already apologetic. He muttered a quick, unheard apology to the air, tucked the book under his arm, and practically fled the library, his voice low and indistinct as he answered the call outside. Eleanor sank back into her chair, a sigh escaping her lips. The opportunity, sharp and clear, had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. It was as if an invisible force field prevented them from truly connecting. It wasn't just a physical barrier, it was a psychological one too. The fear of intrusion, the awkwardness of initiating, the uncertainty of reception, all conspired to keep their words unspoken. Later that week, she found herself at the old lighthouse, the very one she had sketched on her first night. It was a climb, but the view was always worth it. As she ascended the winding stairs, the scent of fresh paint was undeniable. At the top, a small group was gathered, the lighthouse keeper, a couple of volunteers, and Leo. He was up a ladder, carefully touching up a section of peeling paint on the railing, a brush clutched in his hand, a smear of white paint on his cheek. He looked rather charmingly disheveled. Almost done, Leo, the keeper boomed. Great job, son. Leo grinned, a genuine, unburdened smile that made Eleanor's stomach flutter. He glanced down, and his eyes met hers again. This time, his smile faltered, a hint of surprise in his gaze, perhaps even a flicker of pleasure. He started to descend the ladder, and Eleanor felt a surge of hope. Was this it? The climb had been an act of fate. But just as his feet touched the ground, another volunteer, a jovial woman with bright red hair, clapped him on the shoulder. "Leo, you're a lifesaver. Come on, we've got cold lemonade waiting. We were just talking about your brilliant idea for the historical plaque." She steered him gently away, towards a cooler and a cluster of people. Leo looked back over his shoulder, a brief, apologetic shrug aimed at Eleanor, before he was absorbed into the conversation. Eleanor watched him, a familiar pang of disappointment blooming in her chest. She had been so close, had felt the invisible thread between them tighten, only for it to be snipped clean by a well-meaning hand. It was a symphony of near misses, each note a tantalizing whisper of what could be, each pause a testament to what wasn't. The summer was beautiful, yes, but it was also beginning to feel like a grand, exquisite tease. The lighthouse incident felt like a turning point. It solidified the frustrating pattern. Every time they were close, something, or someone, intervened. Eleanor started to feel a different kind of ache, not just longing, but a subtle undercurrent of resignation. Perhaps it simply wasn't meant to be. This summer, after all, was supposed to be about her art, her transition, not a fleeting romance with a stranger. Yet, the thought brought no comfort. She found herself spending more time at a secluded cove, accessible only by a winding, overgrown path. It was her secret sanctuary, a place where the waves crashed against ancient rocks, and the world felt infinitely far away. One afternoon, after an hour of sketching the raw power of the ocean, she packed up her materials, ready to leave. As she stood, her gaze fell upon a small, smooth piece of driftwood nestled in the sand. It wasn't remarkable, save for the faint, intricate carving on its surface, a stylized wave, almost like a signature. And beside it, half buried, a small, dark blue stone, perfectly polished by the sea. She picked it up, turning it over in her palm. It felt familiar, though she couldn't place why. Then, a memory surfaced. She'd seen a similar stone, just like this one, sitting on the corner of Leo's table at the cafe, tucked beside his laptop. He'd been tracing its smooth surface with his thumb while contemplating his screen. Her heart gave a little leap. Had he been here? In her secret cove? A sudden breeze rustled through the tall grasses, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible scent that made her pause, a subtle blend of sea salt, old paper, and something distinctly masculine that she'd come to associate with him. It was a fleeting impression, like the ghost of a touch. He had been here. He'd left behind a silent echo of his presence. She kept the stone, tucking it into her pocket, its smooth coolness a comfort against her skin. It was a tiny, tangible piece of him, a silent communication across the unbridgeable distance. A few days later, it was her turn. She had been working on a complex charcoal piece, capturing the dramatic light of a storm brewing over the sea. She'd decided to try working outdoors, setting up her easel near the abandoned boathouse, a place she rarely saw anyone. Lost in her art, she didn't notice the storm building, only the darkening light that made her subject so compelling. Then the first fat drops of rain began to fall. She scrambled to cover her work, packing her charcoal and papers in a frantic rush. In her haste, her favorite, well-used charcoal stick, sharpened to a fine point, slipped from her bag. She ran back to the cottage, soaked but exhilarated by the storm. It wasn't until later, as she dried her hair, that she noticed its absence. Her prized charcoal stick. Her heart sank. She pictured it, lying abandoned in the rain, dissolving into nothingness. The next morning, the world felt scrubbed clean, the air crisp and fresh. Driven by a foolish hope, she walked back to the boathouse. The ground was still damp, but there, tucked carefully under a piece of driftwood, was her charcoal stick. Beside it, a small, folded piece of paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it. Inside, in a surprisingly elegant, precise hand, were two words, asterisk found this. Asterisk and then, a small, simple drawing, a wave, identical to the one carved on the driftwood she'd found. It was his signature, his quiet acknowledgement. Eleanor stared at the note, a rush of emotions flooding her. Relief, yes, for her charcoal stick. But more profoundly, a dizzying sense of connection. He had found it. He had recognized it as hers, or at least as something worth preserving. He had left it for her, at their shared, almost secret spot. And the wave, he knew about the wave. It wasn't a conversation, not a meeting, but it was an exchange. A silent, tender whisper between them, an imprint left on the summer air, confirming that their observations were mutual, their presence felt. The stone in her pocket, the charcoal in her hand, the wave in her mind, they were threads, invisible yet strong, weaving them closer, even as they remained apart. The discovery of the note and the charcoal stick filled Eleanor with a strange mix of euphoria and anguish. The euphoria of knowing he saw her, knew her, in some unspoken way. The anguish that time was slipping away. Summer, that boundless expanse of possibility, was now beginning to show signs of its inevitable end. The leaves on the maple trees were just beginning to hint at crimson, the mornings held a subtle chill, and the tourists, once a vibrant flood, were trickling out of Seabrook. She saw Leo less frequently now. His usual haunts, the cafe, the bookstore, the bench overlooking the sea, were often empty, or filled with strangers. A knot of anxiety began to tighten in her stomach. Maeve, the barista, mentioned offhandedly, "Leo's been finishing up his novel, he's barely been in. Said he's got a deadline, gotta get back to the city soon." The words hung in the air, a death knell to her unspoken hopes. Back to the city, just like her. But their paths, it seemed, were destined to diverge before they could truly meet. One evening, as she sat on her porch, sketching the increasingly fiery sunsets, a sense of quiet desperation settled over her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that if she didn't act soon, this silent, beautiful connection would simply evaporate, becoming a wistful memory of a summer that almost was. She would leave Seabrook, he would leave Seabrook, and they would be two ships passing in the vast ocean of life, having only caught glimpses of each other's distant lights. She pulled out the small, smooth blue stone he had left at her cove, rubbing it between her thumb and forefinger. Its coolness was no longer comforting, but a reminder of the fleeting nature of their almost connection. She held the charcoal stick, remembering his elegant script, his simple wave. They were fragments, shards of a beautiful mosaic she'd never had the chance to complete. Eleanor tried to rationalize it. It was foolish, this intense longing for a man she barely knew, whose voice she'd only heard in passing. She knew nothing of his life, his dreams beyond the vague mention of a novel. But her heart didn't listen to reason. It pulsed with the quiet intensity of what could be, a powerful yearning born from shared glances, unspoken understanding, and the tantalizing proximity of their souls. She thought about her art, the purpose of her summer. Hadn't she sought inspiration? And hadn't Leo, in his mysterious, quiet way, been the most profound inspiration of all? He had become the unspoken muse for her emotions, the quiet subject of her most heartfelt sketches. To leave without ever truly speaking, without acknowledging the current that flowed between them, felt like an artistic failure, a life unlived. The next morning, driven by a sudden, fierce resolve, Eleanor decided. She would seek him out. She would break the silent barrier. She didn't know what she would say, or even where he was, but the alternative, a lifetime of what-ifs, was far more terrifying. She pictured herself, years from now, looking back at this summer, haunted by the image of the man with ocean-deep eyes, wondering why she hadn't been brave enough. She wouldn't let that happen. The fading light of summer was no longer a lament, it was a deadline. The rising panic in her chest was now tempered by a surprising surge of courage. She tucked the blue stone into her pocket, gathered her sketchbook, and stepped out into the crisp morning air, determined to chase the almost missed. Eleanor's search began with a focused intensity she usually reserved for her art. She started with the most obvious places. The cafe, where Maeve could offer no new insights, only a shrug and a sympathetic smile. The bookstore, silent and still, its shelves holding no trace of him. The bench by the sea, empty save for a lone seagull. Each empty spot felt like a tightening band around her chest. She walked the familiar cobblestone streets, her eyes scanning every face, every open doorway. The quaint boutiques, the antique shops, the small art gallery she'd admired, none held his presence. The summer crowds had thinned considerably, making her search both easier and more desperate. There were fewer people to hide him, but also fewer opportunities for him to simply be in a public space. Her heart pounded with a nervous rhythm, a desperate drumbeat against the quiet hum of the fading summer. Where would he go? Where would he spend his last moments in Seabrook? She thought of the lighthouse, where they'd almost spoken, where he'd left a smudge of paint and a dazzling smile. She hiked the path, the salty air stinging her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But the lighthouse keeper's cottage, usually so vibrant with activity, was dark and silent. A for rent sign was already staked into the lawn. He was gone. A wave of profound disappointment washed over her, cold and heavy. She leaned against the weathered fence, the rough wood digging into her palms. He was truly gone. She had missed him. The ache in her chest intensified, a sharp, familiar pain. This was it, then. The summer of almost. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She had been too slow, too hesitant. Her artistic inspiration had found its muse, but her heart had let him slip away. She closed her eyes, picturing his face, the crinkle of his eyes when he smiled, the quiet intensity when he wrote. How could someone leave such an indelible mark on her life without ever truly entering it? Suddenly, a faint, almost melodic sound drifted on the wind. It was subtle, easily mistaken for the whisper of the sea, but Eleanor's artist's ear caught its nuance. A simple, haunting tune played on a harmonica. It wasn't coming from the lighthouse itself, but from below, towards the small, rocky beach that lay beneath the cliff, accessible only by a steep, rarely used path. Hope, fragile but persistent, flared within her. It was a long shot, but it was something. She scrambled down the slippery, uneven path, pebbles dislodging beneath her feet. The sound grew clearer, a lonely, evocative melody, full of yearning. And then she saw him. He was sitting on a large, flat rock at the water's edge, his back to her, facing the vast expanse of the ocean. His shoulders were slumped slightly, a sense of quiet melancholy emanating from him. He had no book today, no notepad. Just the small, silver harmonica pressed to his lips, drawing out the final, lingering notes of his song. Eleanor paused, hidden by the rocks, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was real, he was here. The summer hadn't completely ended, not yet. This was her last chance. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of weeks of silent observation and mutual longing. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she stepped out from behind the rocks, her voice a hesitant whisper against the roar of the waves. "Leo?" Leo's shoulders stiffened, and the harmonica fell silent. He turned slowly, his eyes, those deep ocean eyes, widening slightly as they met hers. Surprise, then recognition, flickered within them. He stood, brushing sand from his jeans, his movements slow and deliberate, as if processing the impossibility of the moment. "Eleanor," he said, her name a quiet revelation on his tongue. It wasn't a question, but a statement of knowing. He knew her name. The realization sent a warmth spreading through her chest, displacing the cold anxiety that had plagued her. You know my name," she managed, her voice still a little breathless. He offered a small, hesitant smile. "Maeve told me. And I've seen your art around the cafe. Your lighthouse sketch is incredible." A blush crept up her neck. "And your harmonica playing is beautiful." A soft chuckle escaped him. "Just a habit. Helps me think." He gestured to the empty space beside him on the rock. "Join me?" Eleanor's legs felt like jelly, but she walked towards him, her heart thrumming with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. She sat down, feeling the cool roughness of the rock beneath her. The waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, a natural soundtrack to their long-awaited meeting. The air was thick with all the words left unsaid over weeks, years, it seemed. I thought you'd left, she confessed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The lighthouse keeper's cottage, it's empty. I was about to, he admitted, his voice low, his gaze mirroring hers. My deadline's tomorrow. I packed everything this morning. Just came down here for one last moment of Seabrook serenity before heading back to the city. He paused, then turned to her, his expression unreadable. What are you doing here, Eleanor? I thought you usually stuck to the higher paths. She took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. I came looking for you. The words tumbled out, honest and raw. His eyes widened again, a spark of something unidentifiable, hope, perhaps, or disbelief, igniting within them. You did? Eleanor nodded, her cheeks burning. She pulled the small, smooth blue stone from her pocket, holding it out to him. You left this at the cove. My cove. She saw the faint smile touch his lips. And you found my charcoal stick. And left a note. He took the stone from her, turning it over in his palm, his thumb tracing its smooth surface, just as she'd seen him do before. I recognized it. Your charcoal, I mean. The way it was sharpened. And the wave. I noticed your sketches, the way you drew the sea. It felt like you were leaving a piece of yourself behind. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, his gaze intense and searching. I hoped you'd find it. Both of them. I did, she whispered. And when I found your note, and the wave, I knew you'd seen me too. All this time. He nodded slowly. All this time. You're hard to miss, Eleanor. The way you lose yourself in your art. The way you find beauty in things others overlook. I've been observing. He offered a sheepish grin. I'm a writer, after all. Observation is part of the job. And I'm an artist, she countered, a small smile finally breaking through her nervousness. Observation is mine too. You are a very compelling subject. His laugh was a soft, warm sound against the waves. A compelling subject, am I? He leaned back on his hands, looking out at the endless blue. I wanted to say something, so many times. At the bookstore, at the lighthouse, but I kept telling myself it was foolish. That you were just a summer daydream. That it would just complicate things. I felt the same, she admitted, her gaze following his. The city awaits, for both of us. It does, he conceded, his voice tinged with regret. But for the past few weeks, the city felt a long way off. My novel, it started taking on a life of its own, inspired by, well, by Seabrook. And by the woman I kept almost meeting. He turned to her again, his expression earnest. I wrote about the longing, you know. The almost connection. The fear of never knowing. Eleanor's heart swelled. He understood. He had felt it too. The shared, unspoken intimacy of their summer had been a mutual experience, a tender dance of near misses. I drew about it, she said softly. The quiet moments. The shared spaces. The longing. He reached out, his hand hovering, then gently touched her arm, his fingers warm against her skin. A quiet spark, soft and electric, passed between them. It was the first real touch, after weeks of almost touches. It felt like we were meant to meet, Eleanor, he murmured, his thumb stroking her arm gently. But the universe seemed determined to keep us apart. Perhaps the universe just wanted to make sure we truly wanted it, she suggested, leaning slightly into his touch, her eyes meeting his. To make us fight for it. He smiled, a slow, breathtaking smile that reached his deep, soulful eyes. I think you might be right. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in soft, bruised purples and fiery oranges, mirroring the tumultuous beauty of Eleanor's heart. The conversation flowed effortlessly now, a dam breaking after weeks of silent contemplation. They talked about their dreams, their fears, their lives beyond Seabrook. He was a struggling writer, pouring his soul into a historical fiction novel inspired by old maritime legends. She was an aspiring artist, grappling with the transition from creative freedom to the rigid structure of a gallery job. They discovered a shared love for obscure poetry, for the smell of old books, for long walks by the sea, and for the quiet contemplation that art and writing demanded. "So, you're really leaving tomorrow?" Eleanor asked, a pang of fear returning. The connection was real, beautiful, but the timer was still ticking. Leo nodded, his gaze distant. "I have a train to catch. Got to get this manuscript to my agent. It's a make-or-break moment." He turned to her, his hand still resting gently on her arm, his thumb now tracing patterns on her skin. "But I don't want to leave. Not now." Eleanor's heart ached with the same sentiment. "I don't want you to either." She felt a vulnerability she hadn't known she possessed, laid bare under the vast, deepening sky. He squeezed her arm gently. "This summer, it was supposed to be a solitary retreat for me. Just the novel. But then you appeared. Or rather, you kept appearing. And suddenly, my solitude felt less like freedom and more like a missing piece." His eyes held hers, earnest and open. "I found myself looking for you. Hoping you'd be at the cafe, at the bookstore, on that bench. And when you weren't, the day felt a little less bright." A tear pricked Eleanor's eye, a tear of profound relief and gratitude. "Me too, Leo. Every time I saw you, my world tilted a little. Every time we almost spoke, I felt a pang of regret. I thought I'd let you slip away for good." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "I left that stone at your cove, hoping you'd understand. And I put your charcoal stick where I knew you'd find it, hoping you'd know it wasn't forgotten." He paused, then his gaze deepened. "I was hoping you'd come looking for me." "And I did," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, a soft, tender smile that melted her heart. He raised his free hand, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away the stray tear. "Eleanor," he breathed, his eyes searching hers, "don't go back to the city without giving us a chance. Don't let this summer be just an almost dot." Her heart soared, lighter than it had been in weeks. This was it. The beautiful, hopeful beginning they had both silently yearned for. "I don't want to," she confessed, her voice barely audible. He leaned in, the scent of sea salt and him enveloping her, and then his lips met hers. It was a soft, tentative kiss at first, full of weeks of unspoken longing, a gentle question. Then, as she responded, it deepened, blooming into something more profound, a silent promise, a breathless affirmation of all the moments they had almost missed. It tasted of salt and hope and the sweet, lingering essence of a summer that had, against all odds, finally found its true beginning. When they finally broke apart, the last vestiges of sunlight had faded, and the first stars had begun to puncture the twilight sky. The sound of the waves felt like a gentle lullaby, wrapping them in a cocoon of quiet intimacy. "My train is tomorrow morning," Leo said, his voice a little hoarse, his forehead resting against hers. "But I can change my ticket. There's a later one, maybe even for a few days from now." He pulled back slightly, his eyes sparkling in the dim light. "What if we spend those extra days together, Eleanor? Really together, this time?" Eleanor smiled, a genuine, joyful smile that reached her eyes. The uncertainty, the longing, the near misses, they all faded into the background, replaced by a radiant sense of peace and burgeoning love. "I'd like that very much, Leo. I have a feeling this summer has a few more chapters left to write." He kissed her again, a deeper, more confident kiss this time, a promise whispered against her lips. The summer of almost was over. The summer of us had just begun. The coastal breeze, once a companion to her solitude, now felt like a witness to their shared beginning, carrying the scent of their newfound hope out over